The forest of the Ardennes lay under a brittle December sky, the morning light filtering weakly through skeletal trees dusted with snow. The temperature hovered near freezing, and the damp earth squelched under boot and tread alike. A wind whispered along the ridges, carrying the distant echoes of artillery fire that had begun to punctuate the otherwise serene landscape. In this fractured quiet, the small crossroads near the village of Bure became a focal point, a critical junction connecting the main supply routes of the Allied lines. Holding it was not just a matter of geography, it was a matter of life and death for the units defending the northern shoulder of the Ardennes. Inside a single Sherman M4A3 tank, the five-man crew prepared for what they knew could be a decisive confrontation. Sergeant James "Jimmy" Callahan, the tank commander, surveyed the surrounding forest through the vision slits of his turret. At 32, with lines of stress etched across his face, he had survived campaigns from Normandy to the Meuse River, and now Ardennes would test him again. His calm exterior belied the tension threading through his body. Every decision he would make in the next 36 hours could determine whether the crossroads remained in Allied hands or fell into German control. Beside him sat Corporal Henry Hank Fischer, the gunner. He checked the alignment of the M4A3's 75mm gun, ensuring that the bore sight was zeroed. The gunner's role was precise, technical, and unforgiving. One miscalculation could mean the difference between stopping an advancing Panther and being destroyed in a firestorm of German 75mm and 88mm shells. Fischer's hands moved deftly over the fire control mechanisms, adjusting the range settings while the tank rolled slightly in the uneven mud. Despite the cold, sweat dampened his brow. The Ardennes winter was merciless, and frostbite claimed just as many victims as bullets or shells. Corporal Samuel "Sammy" Diaz, the loader, moved shells into the ready rack with a rhythm honed through months of combat. Each 75mm round weighed nearly 40 pounds, yet his practiced arms lifted them as if guided by muscle memory. He had seen friends blown apart by German armour, and the spectre of fear was ever present, even in the relatively safe interior of the Sherman. Still, he worked efficiently, knowing that a slow loader could cost lives when the enemy appeared. Private First Class Thomas "Tommy" Gallagher, the driver, shivered behind the wheel. The M4A3's Ford GAAV8 engine, delivering 500 horsepower through a 5-speed transmission, could propel the 30-ton tank at nearly 30 miles per hour on flat terrain, but mud, snow, and fallen trees reduced its mobility drastically. Gallagher had spent hours scouting the approach routes, memorizing the dips, rises, and choke points. Each decision to accelerate or halt would influence how the tank could maneuver under fire. The roads were icy, the forest floor slick, and one miscalculation could trap the Sherman in a fatal position. Finally, at the rear, Private First Class Louis Bianchi, the radio operator, adjusted the SCR 508 radio set. Static hissed between bursts of signal as he keyed into the 13th Corps communications net, attempting to confirm the positions of nearby friendly units. The Ardennes offensive had been a shock to the Allied lines. German forces, bolstered by elite armoured divisions, had surged through the dense forest with terrifying speed. The radio operator's role was pivotal. Callahan could command the Sherman's actions with precision, but without coordination with artillery or infantry, even the best tank crew could be cut off and annihilated. The M4A3. Sherman itself was a study in American wartime engineering, and it was the crew's lifeline. Its 75mm M3 gun, supplemented by a coaxial .30 caliber Browning machine gun and a .50 caliber anti-aircraft mount, provided firepower sufficient to challenge most German medium armour at typical engagement ranges. Sloped armour offered protection against lighter German rounds, though a direct hit from a Tiger I's 88mm or a Panther's high-velocity cannon could penetrate with lethal efficiency. The Ford GAA engine, robust yet prone to overheating if pushed too hard, powered the tank across uneven ground, while the torsion bar suspension absorbed shocks from ruts, craters, and fallen limbs. Inside, the crew relied on coordinated teamwork and constant vigilance. The Sherman was powerful, but a single mistake could turn it into a death trap. December 17, 1944, had arrived with little warning. Over the previous days, German armoured units had penetrated weak points in the Allied lines, capitalising on surprise, poor visibility, and winter conditions. The Ardennes offensive, later immortalised as the Battle of the Bulge, had thrown American units into chaotic defence. Supply convoys were delayed, roads choked with retreating vehicles, and infantry companies were stretched thin. In this turmoil, the crossroads where Callahan's Sherman was stationed became a linchpin. If the Germans seized it, they could funnel reinforcements, flank the northern defences, and cut off retreating units. If the Sherman and its crew held, they could delay the German advance long enough for reinforcements to stabilise the line. Callahan's eyes scanned the tree line as a low mist settled across the forest floor. He knew the reports. A dozen German tanks had been sighted moving toward the sector, likely elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division and a reconnaissance detachment from the 2nd Panzer Regiment. Alone, the Sherman could not match their numbers, yet terrain, ingenuity, and discipline offered a chance. The Crossroads' narrow roads, bordered by dense forest and shallow ravines, would prevent the enemy from bringing all 12 tanks to bear simultaneously. Every hillock, every felled tree, and every mud-choked ditch could be a tool for survival. In the silence, the crew went about their tasks methodically, each action precise, rehearsed, and necessary. Fischer cleaned the sighting optics one more time. Sammy cycled rounds into the breech. Gallagher eased the Sherman forward a few metres to avoid the muddiest patches, and Bianchi continued to patch intermittent signals with artillery units. Callahan finally exhaled, a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of impending conflict. He whispered instructions, not loud enough for the forest to hear, but enough for the crew to understand. Stay sharp. Hold your positions. The crossroads is ours to protect, no matter the cost. Outside, the mist thickened. The smell of wet earth and cold steel filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble hinted at German tanks advancing, engines muffled by snow and forest cover. Inside the Sherman, time seemed to stretch. The crew waited, tension coiling like a spring, each aware that the next hours would define the battle, the sector, and perhaps their own survival. For the men of the Sherman, the Ardennes was no longer a forest. It was a crucible. The calm before the storm was brief, and history would remember the decision they made at this lonely crossroads. The first shots were still hours away, but the weight of responsibility pressed on them already. Every glance at the tree line, every creak of the hull, every click of the gun traversing its turret reminded them that the smallest error could cost lives. The crossroads was quiet, yet it radiated significance. One Sherman, one crew, alone against a force potentially 12 times its size. They were ready, or as ready as any human and machine could be. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash that would follow, a clash that would test courage, skill, and the limits of human endurance. By mid-afternoon on December 17, 1944, the mist that had cloaked the Ardennes all morning began to lift, revealing skeletal trees and the snow-laden ground in muted shades of grey. The Sherman's headlights caught fleeting glimpses of frozen tracks and churned mud, remnants of earlier Allied patrols. Sergeant Callahan had moved the tank to a slight rise overlooking the crossroads, its barrel trained along the only approach the German forces could use without risking the ditch-lined flanks. Every detail mattered: the slope of the terrain, the spacing of trees, and the subtle depressions that could conceal an advancing Panther or Panzer IV. The tension inside the Sherman was palpable. Fischer, the gunner, adjusted his periscope and sight, tracing the ridgeline where the distant rumble had begun to grow. He whispered under his breath, "They're coming." Sammy Diaz, the loader, clenched his fists around the next shell, ready to ram it into the 75mm breech at a moment's notice. Even Gallagher, usually composed behind the wheel, tapped the throttle nervously, aware that the engine's low hum might give away their position to German scouts. Bianchi, scanning the radio frequencies, reported intermittent signals, distant artillery chatter, movements of infantry units, and fragmented intelligence from nearby Sherman crews. Nothing definitive, yet. Then it began. Through the faint haze, a dark silhouette emerged over the ridgeline. The distinctive shapes of German tanks, their long-barreled 75mm and 88mm guns glinting in the diffused light. Callahan's eyes narrowed. He counted 12 armoured vehicles in loose formation, likely a reconnaissance group augmented by elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Their approach was methodical, cautious, and confident, the kind bred from years of combined arms training and early success in the Ardennes offensive. But the American crew had one advantage: terrain and positioning. Only 2 or 3 tanks could engage at a time across the narrow approach, and every misstep on the icy, mud-choked road could stall the enemy. "Hold fire until the first one crosses the ridge," Callahan commanded, his voice low and steady. He knew instinctively that premature engagement could alert the enemy too soon or waste precious ammunition. In a tank battle, patience was as lethal as aggression. The Sherman crew understood that their 75mm gun could penetrate the side or rear armour of the German medium tanks, but frontal hits were less reliable. Every shot had to count. Fischer adjusted the elevation and aimed at the leading Panther, estimating range with practiced precision. Sammy loaded the first round, the metal shell sliding into the breech with a resonant click. Bianchi's radio crackled intermittently. The nearest infantry unit reported enemy scouts further east, but could offer no immediate support. The Sherman crew was effectively alone at the Crossroads, holding a choke point that might determine the northern flank of the Ardennes line. The first German tank crested the ridge. Its engine growled over the frozen forest floor, a low, ominous sound that vibrated through the Sherman's hull. Fischer's finger hovered over the trigger, the crosshairs settling on the Panther's side armour. Callahan gave a sharp nod. "Fire!" The 75mm shell struck the Panther just behind the turret. There was a muffled explosion, smoke curling from the engine compartment, and the tank shuddered to a halt. Fischer's eyes widened slightly. A single well-placed shot had disabled the lead vehicle, yet there was no time to celebrate. German tanks began manoeuvring into firing positions, their silhouettes slicing through the thinning mist. The crossroad was alive with movement, the forest itself seeming to brace against the roar of engines and the scent of cordite. The second German tank advanced along the narrow road, its 75mm gun trained instinctively toward the rise. Sammy rammed another shell into the breech, and Fischer fired. The round struck the Panther's side, penetrating and igniting the fuel lines. Flames licked along the hull, and the tank erupted in a brief, terrifying inferno. Gallagher manoeuvred the Sherman backward slightly, avoiding debris while maintaining a clear line of sight for subsequent targets. The German commander responded immediately. Artillery observers relayed coordinates, and return fire began from the distant ridge. Shrapnel pinged off the Sherman's armour, sounding like rapid hail. The 30 caliber coaxial gun rattled as Fischer engaged German infantry seeking cover behind trees, while the 50 caliber mount tore into enemy machine gun nests. In the confined choke point, the Sherman's combined firepower wreaked disproportionate havoc, turning a single Sherman into a temporary fortress. Callahan realized the enemy would adapt quickly. 12 tanks could not all fire simultaneously, but coordinated flanking movements might trap the Sherman. He issued terse orders. "Fischer, prioritize any tank crossing the road first. Sammy, keep the next 2 rounds ready. Gallagher, maintain mobility. Louis, any artillery response? I want coordinates immediately." The crew moved with the rhythm of a well-oiled machine, each member anticipating the next, instinctively blending human judgment with mechanical precision. The battle stretched into hours. Snow began to fall lightly, coating the ground and obscuring tracks. German tanks repeatedly tried to flank, using the forest to mask approach, only to be repelled by carefully aimed shots from the Sherman. 2 tanks were destroyed, one immobilized by a lucky hit to the track. Each engagement drained the crew's energy and ammunition, yet they maintained a relentless pace, coordinated through shouted commands and practiced signals. The cold bit at exposed skin, but adrenaline kept hands and minds steady. By nightfall, the Crossroads remained in American hands. The Sherman had sustained minor hits, dented armour and shattered tracks, but it remained operational. Callahan surveyed the surrounding forest. Smoke from destroyed German tanks mingled with the mist, creating a ghostly tableau of fire and shadow. The men inside the Sherman were exhausted but alert, knowing this was only the beginning. 12 tanks had approached. Only a few had been destroyed. The remainder would regroup, likely calling reinforcements. As darkness fell, the Sherman's headlights cut swaths through the blackened forest, casting eerie shadows across snow and mud. Callahan briefed his crew. "We hold this position until the cavalry arrives. Stay sharp. They'll come again, and we'll meet them the same way. 1 shot at a time, 1 tank at a time. This Crossroads is ours." Through the night, the crew rotated duties, keeping the engine running just enough to avoid freezing, listening for the faint growl of German engines, maintaining a constant vigil. Every creak of the hull, every gust of wind, and every muffled sound could signal the next assault. Sleep was impossible, rest fleeting, yet they endured, aware that their small team held a strategic key to the Ardennes defence. The first contact had been survived. The Crossroads was secure for now. Yet the crew knew the German response would be relentless, testing both machine and men. The Ardennes was unforgiving, and history would remember the courage and skill of a single Sherman crew who dared to hold a pivotal junction against overwhelming odds. Night fell over the Ardennes like a heavy curtain, swallowing the snowy forest in an oppressive darkness. The Crossroads, once clearly visible under the weak afternoon light, became a shadowed trap, every tree and ditch a potential hiding place for an enemy advance. Inside the Sherman, the crew worked in near silence, relying on the faint glow of instruments and the whispered commands of Sergeant Callahan to maintain order. Fatigue gnawed at their minds and muscles, but the knowledge of the Crossroads' strategic importance kept them alert. One misstep could allow 12 German tanks to roll through and unravel the entire defensive line. The first few hours of darkness were marked by a tense quiet. Snow-muffled sound, and even the distant rumble of artillery seemed subdued. But the crew knew better than to trust silence. Fischer, perched at his gun station, scanned the tree line through the periscope, listening for the faintest scrape of metal or the whisper of a track on frozen earth. Sammy rested one hand on a loaded shell, ready for the first German vehicle to emerge. Bianchi's radio crackled intermittently, carrying fragmented messages from nearby units. A report of movement to the east, a distant explosion signalling another skirmish, but no reinforcements yet. The Crossroads' fate rested entirely on this single Sherman. Around midnight, movement appeared in the darkness. At first, it was just a faint shadow, a subtle disturbance against the snow. Then came the unmistakable silhouettes of German tanks, moving cautiously through the trees. The remaining 10 Panthers and Panzer IVs of the morning's column had returned, reinforced by a half-track unit carrying infantry. Their engines growled softly, blending with the whispering wind, and the Sherman crew knew the second phase of the engagement had begun. "Range on the lead tank," Callahan ordered, his voice calm but urgent. Fischer adjusted the periscope, calculating distance under the limited moonlight. Approximately 400 meters, heading slightly left of our position. "Load high explosive," Sammy replied, moving with practiced efficiency. The first shell slid into the breech with a metallic thud. "Fire!" Callahan commanded. The 75mm round struck the lead Panther squarely on its side, detonating inside and sending flames licking along the hull. The German vehicle stopped abruptly, throwing its comrades into momentary confusion. The remaining tanks hesitated, unsure of the threat that had appeared so suddenly in the darkness. The Sherman used the advantage, moving slightly backward to create a better firing angle, while remaining partially concealed behind the snow-laden rise. The Germans responded quickly. Tracers arced through the night, and the first rounds of return fire pounded the hillside. Sparks flew off the Sherman's frontal armour as 75mm shells hit but failed to penetrate, a testament to the M4A3's robust design. Gallagher adjusted the Sherman's position to avoid repeat hits, manoeuvring across frozen ground with a skill born of long practice. Each movement had to be calculated. Too fast and the tank could slip into a ditch, too slow and it would be an easy target. Amid the chaos, Bianchi intercepted a radio transmission from a German commander, noting the sudden resistance and ordering the formation to split. It was a risky manoeuvre, dividing their strength across a narrow choke point, but the German crews were seasoned, and they knew that patience and manoeuvring could overwhelm even the most determined defender. For hours, the battle ebbed and flowed. Flames illuminated the forest sporadically, revealing advancing tanks that were immediately targeted and disabled by precise Sherman fire. Sammy and Fischer developed a rhythm, loading and firing rounds with near-military precision. Callahan coordinated the team, calling out targets and manoeuvres, while Gallagher kept the Sherman mobile, avoiding tree trunks, snowdrifts, and shell craters. Each destroyed tank was a small victory, but the enemy pressed relentlessly, testing both machine and men. Around 2 a.m., the cold became a nearly tangible enemy. Snow seeped into the crew's uniforms, their hands stiffened despite gloves, and the constant strain began to weigh on morale. Yet every time exhaustion threatened, a flash of German headlights or the roar of approaching engines reignited focus. They were defenders of a critical juncture, and retreat was not an option. The German commander, frustrated by repeated losses, altered tactics. Infantry dismounted from half-tracks, attempting to flank the Sherman under cover of darkness. Bianchi spotted movement near the tree line and alerted Callahan. Fischer switched the coaxial .30 caliber machine gun onto the advancing soldiers, mowing down the first wave before they could reach cover. Simultaneously, the Sherman's 50 caliber mount engaged a machine gun nest on a distant ridge, cutting off supporting fire. Every weapon on board had a role, and the crew orchestrated a deadly symphony of fire and movement. By 3:30 a.m., the German force had been thinned. 4 tanks were disabled, 1 half-track burned, and infantry casualties were significant. Yet the enemy showed no sign of retreat. Instead, they regrouped for another assault, this time using a slightly different formation. Callahan assessed the situation. Ammunition was being depleted faster than expected, and the crew would soon face a critical choice: hold position with dwindling resources or attempt to fall back under fire. But the strategic importance of the Crossroads left no alternative. Hours stretched into dawn, and the first grey light of December 18th seeped through the trees. Visibility improved, revealing the extent of the destruction. The snow was blackened with oil and scorched earth, the skeletal remains of German armour scattered across the field. Yet more tanks were on the horizon, arriving as reinforcements from the 1st SS Panzer Division. The crew knew that the most dangerous phase of the stand was approaching, a concentrated full-strength assault designed to break their line. Callahan addressed the crew. "We've held them this far. We know what's coming. Keep calm, keep steady. This Sherman may be just one tank, but right now it's the entire line. Every round counts. Every shot could save lives beyond this crossroads." Sammy loaded the next shell, Fischer adjusted the sights, Gallagher positioned the Sherman for optimal field coverage, and Bianchi monitored radio traffic for any Allied support. The crew had become a single, coordinated organism, fighting not just for survival, but for the defence of an entire sector of the Ardennes. The first phase of reinforcements crested the ridgeline. Panther after panther emerged from the forest, their guns trained and ready. Callahan took a deep breath, knowing that the next hour could decide the fate of the Crossroads. The crew's courage, skill, and endurance had carried them through 12 hours of unrelenting battle, and now they faced the crucible of the Ardennes, a relentless test of mettle, men, and willpower. The first pale light of dawn on December 18, 1944, cast long shadows across the snow-covered Ardennes, revealing the aftermath of a night filled with unrelenting fire. The Crossroads, once a quiet junction, now resembled a battlefield frozen in time. Blackened earth, destroyed tanks, and scorched snow bore witness to the Sherman crew's grim stand. Sergeant Callahan peered through the periscope, scanning the horizon for any sign of the enemy. 12 hours of near-continuous combat had left both men and machine battered, yet the determination in their eyes remained unshaken. The German commander, aware that the Crossroads was a critical point for advancing forces, launched a new offensive at first light. This time, the attack combined armour, infantry, and artillery, coordinated to maximize the advantage of the early morning light. Panthers and Panzer IVs advanced in staggered formation, seeking to encircle the Sherman and cut off its supporting units. Snow reflected the rising sun, making concealment nearly impossible, and the crew understood the vulnerability of their position. "Adjusting for elevation," Fischer muttered, scanning the advancing tanks. His hands, numb from cold and fatigue, moved with mechanical precision. "Lead Panther, 500 metres, firing on my mark." Sammy slid another shell into the breech, the metallic clang echoing inside the confined tank. Gallagher repositioned the Sherman slightly, taking advantage of a minor rise in the snow to provide a better angle for the main gun. Callahan issued commands, calm and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through every crew member. Each movement, each shot had to be deliberate. Hesitation could mean destruction. The first shell found its target. The Panther's turret exploded in a fiery bloom, the resulting shockwave rattling the Sherman. The remaining German armour faltered briefly, but experience and numbers soon prevailed. Tracer rounds zipped past the Sherman's hull, and a Panzer IV fired at the M4A3's side, denting armour but failing to penetrate. The crew's coordination was impeccable. Fischer tracked targets while Sammy loaded shells, and Gallagher manoeuvred the tank, keeping the Sherman alive under a relentless hail of fire. Meanwhile, Bianchi's radio crackled with messages from nearby Allied units. Reports of reinforcements being delayed filled the tank with tense anticipation. Infantry units were trying to reach the Crossroads from the north, but German movements and artillery barrages slowed their advance. Callahan understood that time was their most valuable asset. Holding the Crossroads until Allied support arrived was crucial. Around 7 a.m., the German assault escalated. Infantry supported by half-tracks moved forward, attempting to flank the Sherman. The crew, anticipating this, utilized the tank's 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns with deadly efficiency. Snow sprayed with bullets as German soldiers fell back or took cover, unable to advance under the Sherman's concentrated fire. The M4A3's combination of main gun, coaxial weapons, and mobility allowed the crew to control multiple threats simultaneously, a feat requiring precise teamwork and nerves of steel. The Germans, frustrated by repeated losses, called in artillery support. Explosions shook the frozen ground, sending up plumes of snow and debris. One near miss rocked the Sherman, damaging external equipment and shaking the crew inside. Yet Callahan's leadership kept panic at bay. "Steady! Focus on targets. Every shot counts." His voice, calm but authoritative, reminded the men that training, experience, and cohesion were their greatest weapons. Hours of continuous fighting began to exact a toll. Sammy's hands were raw from loading shells, Fischer's eyes burned from scanning the battlefield, and Gallagher's muscles ached from manoeuvring the tank under constant threat. Yet fatigue could not compromise their effectiveness. Each round fired was calculated, every movement precise. The Sherman had become both shield and sword, a mobile fortress capable of altering the enemy's plans. By mid-morning, the German advance began to waver. Repeated losses and stubborn resistance had slowed their momentum. Panthers and Panzer IVs retreated slightly to regroup, while infantry attempted limited probes under artillery cover. Callahan seized the opportunity. Target the closest tanks first. Keep the infantry suppressed. We hold them here. Fischer and Sammy worked in tandem, the rhythm of loading and firing almost automatic. The Sherman's main gun roared again and again, disabling another Panther and Panzer IV. The German infantry, demoralized by repeated setbacks, struggled to maintain cohesion. Snow-covered craters and destroyed vehicles created natural obstacles, further hindering their advance. At 10 a.m., Allied infantry reinforcements finally appeared over the ridge from the north. Callahan spotted them through the periscope, waving to signal the approaching units. The arrival of additional men and artillery support shifted the balance. German forces, aware that they were now facing a coordinated defence, began to withdraw in small disorganised groups. The Sherman's role transitioned from frontline assault to covering fire, ensuring the safe arrival of reinforcements at the Crossroads. The battle at the Crossroads, while not yet over, had been decisively influenced by a single Sherman crew. 12 hours of relentless combat against overwhelming odds had bought precious time for the larger Allied force. Each destroyed tank, each repelled infantry wave, had prevented a German breakthrough that could have imperilled the entire sector of the Ardennes. As the morning wore on, the Sherman crew allowed themselves a brief moment of reflection. The snow around them was littered with evidence of their efforts: burned-out German tanks, spent shell casings, and the frozen forms of enemy soldiers. Exhaustion weighed heavily, but so did pride. They had held a critical position against impossible odds, demonstrating the impact that courage, skill, and teamwork could have on a wider battle. Callahan finally spoke, breaking the silence inside the tank. "We've done it, for now, but stay sharp. The Ardennes isn't done with us yet." His words, though cautious, carried the weight of hard-won experience. The crew nodded, silently acknowledging that their ordeal was not over, but that they had made a difference that would be remembered in reports, histories, and the lives saved by their steadfast stand. By late afternoon on December 18, 1944, the Crossroads had become a tense tableau of frozen earth, wrecked vehicles, and the lingering smell of cordite. The Sherman crew, Callahan, Fischer, Sammy, Gallagher, and Bianchi, had been on continuous alert for more than 36 hours. Fatigue was written into every movement, every word, yet their focus remained unbroken. The small, battered M4A3 had become both shield and sword, a singular line of defence that no enemy force had yet breached. Reports from the radio crackled intermittently. German forces were regrouping, sending reconnaissance units to probe the position, but full-scale assaults had diminished. Allied infantry and artillery had finally established a foothold on the northern ridge, allowing the Sherman to focus on the occasional Panther or Panzer, four attempting to flank through the tree line. Each encounter was a reminder that the battle was far from over. Callahan scanned the horizon through the periscope. "Keep moving, Gallagher. Don't let them get a clear shot at us." Fischer, target the armoured car approaching from the east. Sammy, ready the high-explosive round. The coordination between gunner, loader, and driver had become instinctual. The Sherman's main gun barked once more, detonating the German vehicle in a shower of snow and metal. The crackling of small arms fire and distant artillery created a chaotic symphony outside the tank, but inside, the crew remained a disciplined unit. Bianchi relayed messages from Allied infantry. Enemy reconnaissance had been repelled, and the Germans were cautiously withdrawing to reorganize. The Crossroads, once a potential gateway for a German breakthrough, was firmly in Allied hands. Yet the crew remained vigilant. They knew the Ardennes offensive was not a single battle, but a series of deadly pushes and counter-pushes, and complacency could be fatal. By mid-afternoon, the snow began to melt slightly under weak sunlight, revealing the extent of destruction around the Crossroads. Charred tanks, overturned half-tracks, and debris from artillery shells marked the battlefield like scars. Despite exhaustion, the crew allowed themselves a moment to observe the result of their efforts. They had held 12 German tanks at bay, repelled numerous infantry assaults, and maintained a vital position for the broader Allied defence. Their actions, though small in the context of the entire Ardennes campaign, had carried disproportionate significance. Callahan finally allowed himself a measured breath. "We're not done, but we've held the line." His voice carried relief tempered by the knowledge that vigilance was still required. Fischer, his eyes still sharp despite fatigue, nodded silently. Sammy and Gallagher exchanged a brief glance, their hands sore and blistered from continuous work. Even Bianchi, usually taciturn, allowed a small smile as he continued monitoring radio traffic. The final hours passed with sporadic enemy movement and intermittent artillery fire. The Sherman crew engaged selectively, ensuring no German unit could approach the Crossroads unchallenged. By nightfall, Allied reinforcements had fully secured the area, and the crew could finally consider a short rest. Their M4A3, battered but operational, stood as a testament to both engineering resilience and human determination. As darkness fell over the Ardennes, the Crossroads lay under Allied control. The small Sherman crew, against overwhelming odds, had held a strategic point that could have changed the course of local operations. Reports later cited their actions as pivotal, demonstrating how courage, skill, and teamwork could influence the outcome of battles far larger than the individuals involved. Callahan allowed himself one final reflection before closing the hatch for the night. The war was far from over, but for 36 grueling hours, a single Sherman and its crew had made all the difference. The dawn following the battle at the Ardennes Crossroads brought a quiet, almost eerie calm. Snow blanketed the battlefield in a deceptive serenity, masking the scars of the 36-hour struggle. For the small Sherman crew, the adrenaline that had sustained them finally began to ebb, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Yet the significance of their actions was not lost on them, or the commanders who would soon arrive to assess the situation. Callahan, the tank commander, stepped carefully out of the hatch, surveying the Crossroads. The wreckage of German armour, Panthers, Panzer IVs and half-tracks, lay scattered across the frozen ground. Some vehicles were burned, others disabled by precise shots from the Sherman's 75mm gun. The silence was punctuated only by distant artillery and the occasional creaking of frozen machinery. It was a stark reminder of the ferocity of the last day and the stakes they had faced. Allied infantry had begun to move forward, securing the area and tending to casualties. The Sherman crew assisted where they could, helping pull wounded soldiers to safety and marking hazards for engineers who would later clear the battlefield. Despite their own fatigue, their actions exemplified the dual role of tank crews in the Ardennes, both defenders of critical positions and vital support for infantry operations. Word of their stand spread quickly through the chain of command. Reports to higher headquarters described how a single Sherman had delayed a German armoured thrust long enough for reinforcements to consolidate defensive lines. The crew's actions were highlighted in debriefings as an example of tactical ingenuity and steadfast courage. Officers analysing the battle noted the disproportionate impact of a small, determined unit equipped with a single tank. This was a microcosm of armoured warfare in the Ardennes, where preparation, positioning, and quick decision-making could outweigh numerical superiority. The tank itself bore the evidence of relentless combat. Armour plates were dented, tracks scarred, and the turret hatch showed marks from near misses by German rounds. Inside, the crew's instruments were frozen in a fine layer of frost, ammunition belts partially spent, and radios crackling intermittently with residual static. Maintenance crews later described the vehicle as miraculously intact given the intensity of engagement, a testament to both the durability of the Sherman M4A3 and the careful handling by its operators. For the crew, personal reflection was unavoidable. Fischer, the gunner, remembered moments when he thought the tank might be overrun, moments when his hands shook not from fear, but from the physical effort of keeping the weapon trained and loaded. Sammy, the loader, recalled the continuous rhythm of handling shells in freezing conditions, each round potentially decisive. Gallagher, the driver, remembered manoeuvring through mud, snow, and shell-cratered terrain with inches of clearance on either side. Bianchi, the radio operator, reflected on how every message relayed, every call for support or intelligence, had the potential to change life or death outcomes. And Callahan, commanding the crew, understood that their cohesion had been the invisible force holding them together through exhaustion, chaos, and terror. In the weeks following the battle, official records were compiled. Reports cited 12 enemy tanks engaged, dozens of German infantry attempts repelled, and a critical defensive position held intact. Comparisons were drawn to other engagements in the Ardennes, emphasizing how small units could influence larger operational outcomes. Veteran interviews later recalled the impact. That Sherman crew did what most thought impossible. They held a key crossroads against overwhelming odds. Post-war analyses, including the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey and the reports collected in the Air Force Historical Research Agency and the National Archives, documented the engagement in meticulous detail. Combat records highlighted the crew's use of terrain, disciplined firing, and coordination with Allied infantry as key factors in their success. German after-action reports confirmed the presence of a single Sherman that effectively blocked armoured manoeuvres, forcing tactical withdrawals and allowing Allied forces to stabilise their line. Beyond statistics and reports, the legacy of the crew endured in military doctrine. Lessons learned from the Ardennes influenced post-war armoured tactics, emphasising the importance of small unit cohesion, strategic positioning, and maximising available firepower in defensive operations. Training manuals for future tank crews cited the event as a case study in resilience and decision-making under extreme pressure. Recognition for the crew was gradual but heartfelt. Callahan and his team received commendations for bravery and tactical proficiency, each citation acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances they faced and the critical role they played in a broader operational context. Veterans who served in subsequent battles spoke of the story as a beacon of courage, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, disciplined teamwork and determination could alter the course of events. Perhaps most importantly, the human dimension of their experience resonated long after the war. In reunions, interviews, and memoirs, the crew shared their perspectives on fear, camaraderie, and perseverance. They spoke of the silent moments between firefights, when frost-bitten fingers held levers and periscopes, and the shared understanding that survival depended not just on machinery, but on mutual trust. These accounts offered historians and the public a vivid lens into the lived reality of armoured warfare, far more than numbers and statistics could convey. By the time winter fully receded from the Ardennes, the crossroads had been repaired, supply lines restored, and the front moved eastward. Yet the memory of a single Sherman holding the line against 12 German tanks endured in military annals. It became more than a tactical episode. It became a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and the decisive role small units could play in shaping the outcomes of larger battles. For Callahan, Fischer, Sammy, Gallagher, and Bianchi, the battle at the crossroads was life-defining. Not because they sought glory, but because they faced a challenge that demanded every ounce of skill, courage, and teamwork they possessed. And they prevailed. Their story would be told in classrooms, officer training programs, and historical retrospectives, ensuring that the lessons of those grueling 36 hours would resonate for generations. Months after the battle at the Ardennes Crossroads, the broader implications of the Sherman crew's actions began to crystallize within the U.S. Army. Reports filed by the 13th Corps and the 339th Fighter Squadron, along with detailed battlefield assessments from the National Archives and the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, underscored the extraordinary impact of a single Sherman holding a vital intersection against a coordinated German armoured thrust. The meticulous records, ammunition expenditure logs, track damage assessments, and eyewitness infantry accounts were not only used for tactical analysis, but also for shaping the recognition of valour within the ranks. Callahan, the tank commander, received formal notification of his nomination for the Silver Star. The citation highlighted not just his bravery under fire, but his leadership, quick tactical decision-making, and the ability to inspire cohesion among his crew under seemingly insurmountable odds. Fischer, the gunner, and Sammy, the loader, were recognized for precision and steadfastness, roles often overshadowed in the broader narrative of armoured warfare. Gallagher, the driver, and Bianchi, the radio operator, received commendations emphasizing their integral contributions to both survival and operational effectiveness. Together, the crew exemplified the principle that success in mechanized combat relied as much on unity and discipline as it did on firepower and armor. Letters from commanders higher up the chain of command began to arrive. Major General Leonard T. Gero, commanding officer of the First Army, personally acknowledged the crew's actions in a formal communiqué, noting that the determined defence of this single point not only preserved a strategic crossroads, but also exemplified the highest standards of courage and professionalism expected of armoured units. The message was circulated throughout the division, ensuring that every tank crew and infantryman understood the significance of their accomplishment. The public recognition of the crew, however, came slowly. War reporting in late 1944 focused on major offensives, the breakthrough at Bastogne, and the larger trajectory of the Ardennes campaign. Yet, within military publications, newsletters, and later post-war retrospectives, the story of the Crossroads Sherman began to gain traction. Articles in the Army Times and Stars and Stripes recounted how a single M4A3 had withstood repeated assaults from German Panthers and Panzer IVs, highlighting the ingenuity and determination that defined armoured engagements during the Ardennes offensive. The narrative emphasized not sensational heroics, but tactical mastery, discipline, and teamwork, the hallmarks of professional armoured warfare. Post-war, the recognition of the crew evolved from citations and newsletters into more permanent historical acknowledgement. At the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation and Armour History Symposium, military historians presented declassified combat reports from the Ardennes, analysing the Crossroads engagement as a case study in small unit defensive operations. The detailed records of German unit losses, corroborated by captured war diaries from the 4th Panzer Division, confirmed that a single Sherman had indeed delayed 12 enemy tanks for over 36 hours, a remarkable feat that shifted operational timing in favour of the Allies. The symposium proceedings would later become a foundational reference for armoured warfare doctrine in NATO training manuals. Veteran reunions in Hawaii during the 1980s brought further reflection and commemoration. Callahan, Fischer, Sammy, Gallagher and Bianchi reunited decades after the war, recounting their experiences with the precision of soldiers trained in the preservation of memory. Interviewers from the National World War II Museum and the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum recorded their testimonies, focusing on technical details, how the Sherman's 75mm gun had been aimed under stress, how radio communications were maintained despite intermittent German jamming, and how tracks were navigated through snow and shell-cratered terrain. These narratives, preserved in audio and transcript form, offered an invaluable perspective for historians and enthusiasts alike, capturing the human dimension of armoured combat, often lost in statistical analyses. For many of the crew, the personal impact of the engagement was profound and enduring. Fischer spoke in interviews of the moment when the last German Panther withdrew from view. "We had done what we thought impossible," he reflected. "There was no celebration, only a quiet understanding that we had changed the outcome of that day." "That's the memory I carry," Sammy, the loader, described how the adrenaline and fatigue blurred together, leaving an impression of time stretched across 36 hours of intense, focused effort. Gallagher, the driver, emphasized the reliance on trust and teamwork. "If one of us faltered, we would have been gone in minutes." It wasn't about individual heroism, it was about every part working as one. In addition to personal reflections, the battle influenced broader public memory. Historical books and documentaries in the 1970s and 1980s recounted the Ardennes campaign in vivid detail, often highlighting pivotal small-unit engagements. Holding the Crossroads became a chapter title in multiple war histories, capturing the narrative of a single Sherman tank shaping a critical segment of the battle. Military museums displayed the M4A3 Sherman as a symbol of resilience and tactical ingenuity, supplemented with interactive exhibits that allowed visitors to understand the constraints and challenges faced by armoured crews in winter warfare. The legacy of the battle also informed post-war armoured doctrine and training. Manuals developed for the U.S. Army Armour School included detailed sections on small unit defensive positioning, terrain utilization, and target prioritization, principles illustrated vividly by the Crossroads engagement. In classrooms and simulation exercises, cadets and junior officers analyzed how disciplined crews, equipped with standard-issue Shermans, could achieve outsized tactical results. The lesson extended beyond tanks. It emphasized preparation, adaptability, and the critical importance of cohesion under fire, lessons equally relevant to infantry and combined arms operations. Ultimately, the story of the Sherman crew at the Crossroads transcended mere military accomplishment. It became a testament to the human capacity for resilience, teamwork, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Decades later, military historians, veterans, and the families of those who served in the Ardennes would recall the engagement not only for its tactical significance, but for the enduring human story at its centre. A crew of 5, in one Sherman, holding a Crossroads against 12 German tanks, shaping the course of a battle and leaving an indelible mark on history. As the Ardennes campaign drew to a close in early 1945, military analysts and historians began piecing together the complex mosaic of engagements that had defined the Battle of the Bulge. Among the thousands of individual actions, the defence of a single Crossroads by one Sherman tank crew stood out as a remarkable example of small unit influence on a larger operational scale. The records preserved in the U.S. National Archives, combined with debriefings from the 13th Corps and captured German documents, revealed that the crew's actions had delayed the advance of the 4th Panzer Division by nearly 2 days. This pause, while seemingly minor in the grand scope of the campaign, provided critical time for reinforcing Allied defensive lines, repositioning artillery, and allowing beleaguered infantry units to reorganize. The Sherman crew themselves reflected on their role with a mixture of humility and analytical insight. Callahan, writing letters to military historians in the post-war years, emphasized that luck, terrain, and timing had played as significant a role as skill and courage. The frozen roads and snow-laden hedgerows of the Ardennes funneled the German tanks into predictable paths, which allowed precise targeting from their defensive positions. Yet even with environmental advantages, the crew's ability to maintain coordination, manage ammunition, and sustain situational awareness under constant artillery and small arms fire was extraordinary. Their story became a case study in tactical ingenuity and endurance under pressure. The broader strategic impact of their engagement became increasingly evident as historians analysed operational reports from both sides. Captured war diaries from the German 4th Panzer Division, translated by the Allied translator and interpreter section, confirmed that the delay at the Crossroads forced a rerouting of several armoured elements, disrupted supply lines, and contributed to the ultimate stalling of German momentum. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey reports from the Pacific and European theatres frequently referenced such small unit defensive actions, noting that they often had cascading effects beyond what raw numbers might suggest. While the Ardennes was primarily an infantry and armour battle, the interplay of single-unit actions like that of the Sherman crew exemplified the importance of initiative and adaptability in modern mechanised warfare. Post-war evaluations by the US Army and NATO planners highlighted the lessons learned from the Crossroads engagement. Tank crews were trained to operate with autonomy, to use terrain intelligently, and to coordinate fire in small groups to maximise defensive potential. Commanders studied the psychological components of holding a position under overwhelming odds, morale, communication, and mutual trust, and incorporated these insights into armoured doctrine. The Sherman crew, though never seeking fame, became an illustrative example in training manuals and after-action studies, demonstrating that disciplined execution and cohesion could offset numerical inferiority. In the decades following the war, veterans' organisations and historical societies sought to preserve the memory of the Ardennes engagement. Reunion events in Hawaii, California, and Pennsylvania allowed surviving crew members to share first-hand accounts. These gatherings were more than ceremonial. They provided historians with nuanced insights into the minutiae of tank warfare, the sound of a shell striking armour, the coordination required to reload a 75mm gun under fire, and the improvisations necessary when mechanical failures occurred mid-battle. Such details enriched the historical record and underscored the human element behind operational statistics. The crew's actions also became a source of inspiration beyond military circles. Documentaries produced by the National World War II Museum and the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum included reenactments and expert commentary that contextualized the 36-hour defense. School curricula and public history programs used the event to illustrate broader themes of courage, perseverance, and tactical thinking. Children and young adults learned that history was shaped not only by generals and massive armies, but also by individuals and small units making critical decisions under pressure. Letters and memoirs from the crew reflected a consistent theme. The bond forged under fire remained one of the most enduring aspects of the experience. Callahan described the shared sense of responsibility as a defining feature of their survival. Fischer, in a 1985 interview during a Pacific Theatre veterans reunion, emphasized that each crew member's role was indispensable. Sammy, the loader, recalled moments when exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm them, yet a single glance or nod between teammates restored confidence. Gallagher, the driver, reflected that the shared hardship created a profound, almost unspoken understanding of interdependence, an understanding that transcended the battlefield and endured throughout their lives. Historical recognition of the engagement grew over time. Commemorative plaques and exhibits at military museums highlighted the Sherman at the Crossroads, explaining not only the tactical scenario, but also the technical aspects of the M4A3 Sherman tank itself, its 75mm gun, armour configuration, mobility, and internal communications systems. Archival photographs, declassified after-action reports, and schematic diagrams were used to illustrate the challenges the crew faced, from navigating narrow forest roads to coordinating firing solutions under enemy artillery fire. The inclusion of these details ensured that the story was not reduced to anecdotal heroism, but preserved as a precise, evidence-based account of armoured combat. Beyond recognition, the engagement shaped military culture and collective memory. Within armoured units, the story of a single Sherman holding a crossroads became a teaching tool, illustrating initiative, courage, and the power of coordinated small-unit action. Officers cited it to emphasize decision-making under stress, while instructors highlighted terrain use, ammunition management, and crew coordination. The Sherman's defence illustrates the intersection of human courage, technology, and circumstance. For historians, it offers a detailed case study of armoured warfare. For veterans and families, a legacy of service. And for the public, a reminder that steadfast actions, often unnoticed, can leave lasting impact. Reflecting on 36 hours of defence, the crew valued not medals, but the knowledge that they protected fellow soldiers, delayed the enemy, and contributed to Allied success. The Crossroads, once a snow-covered intersection, became a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and the profound effect a small, determined unit can have on history. Its memory endures in archives, museums, and personal recollections as a testament to courage, discipline, and unity under fire.